Yo, what is going on, guys? Dr. Ethan Turner here with the Fantasy Headliners, and we are back with another blind comparison video. Last week we did running backs. This week we're doing some wide receivers, but before we get into that, you guys have been slamming that like button. Appreciate all the likes, the comments, and so we have been hitting our like goals. Every 250 likes, I give away a rookie injury guide written by yours truly, and every 1,000 likes this video gets, we're going to give away a Fantasy Headliners draft guide. So we do have a few of those to give away. If your name is up on the screen, congratulations, you are a winner of either a Fantasy Headliners draft guide or my rookie injury guide. So make sure you email Jake at info@thefantasyheadliners.com to get your free guide on the dock. But let's get into it. Some blind comparisons for wide receivers. You know the drill. We're going to throw a couple guys up on the board and just kind of compare some stats. And then we're going to guess to see who these guys may be. Or you guys are going to guess, not me. But let's get into it. Wide receiver blind comparisons. Let's go. Okay, blind comparison here. Let's roll. First guy up on the left, you're going to notice right away with this comparison that these guys did not play the same amount of games. So this is just keep in mind that option B did play 3 less games. So although their numbers are almost identical across the board, option B did play 3 less games. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about who these guys might be. Receptions similar, targets, both these guys getting a healthy target workload, 128, 127, but in 14 games, so probably closer to that 145-ish. Yardage given advantage again to option B on the right. Touchdowns though going to option A, pretty good in the red zone. Yards per game going to option B in those 14 games. Our yardage was almost identical, so clearly a little bit of an advantage there to option B. Fantasy points per game is in PPR formats for all of these comparisons, so 15 to 17, so about 2 more fantasy points per game if you go with option B. Price tag, though, is reflecting that. So option A going in the 7th round as wide receiver 31. Option B going in the 5th round as wide receiver 21. So we're looking at a wide receiver 2 versus a wide receiver 3, and they're reflecting those price tags. But let's get into it. Who do you guys think these are? Leave some comments down below, but let's reveal these. On the left, option A, we have Hunter Renfro. On the right, we have Chris Godwin. And I was a little surprised at how close these guys really were numbers-wise, even though clearly the missed games being a big factor here with these two guys. But I think this is a great comparison to a floor player versus a ceiling player with a little bit more risk, a little bit of a risk-reward type of player. Hunter Renfro is going to get you consistent targets every single week, consistent catches. He's going to score some touchdowns. He's going to be very just kind of middle of the pack, solid wide receiver 2 that you're getting still at a wide receiver 3 price, which is pretty good. I think the offense as a whole is going to take a bump up. So Hunter Renfro could be in line for similar amounts of targets, but a little bit even more efficiency in the red zone if the team is no longer having to put him against top cornerbacks for the other, for the teams that they're playing against. Chris Godwin, I could realistically see a place where he plays only 14 games again this season. So this is really about how you want to build your teams. Personally, I'm kind of staying away from Godwin. The ACL tear kind of freaks me out a little bit. I'll be honest, I don't draft guys that tear their ACLs right at the end of the season, trying to come back. He looks okay in camp, but he's probably going to miss a few games. If he can get ramped up and be healthy in the second half, he might be a league winner. But he also has that risk of a compensatory injury that could really significantly affect the number of games that he plays. So either way, these are 2 guys that you're probably looking at if you're taking running backs early. Me personally, I'm going to probably take somebody else instead of Chris Godwin where he's going in drafts. And I'm still looking at Hunter Renfro as a really solid, safe, wide receiver 2-3 option that I can kind of plug in every week. He's going to get me consistent targets and catches. And he's probably going to be, at least, while he probably won't win me a ton of weeks, he's probably not going to lose me any weeks either. And I'm going to ride the running backs that I take early in drafts when I'm looking at, drafting a Hunter Renfro type. All right, this comparison is really interesting when you're just looking at the raw numbers. Clearly, option A on the left, more efficient with the targets that he was getting, 129 targets, 76 receptions. So not nearly as many receptions, but still pretty close from the yardage. Okay, guy on the right, 157 targets. This is a target hog for sure. 106 receptions, pretty efficient. But the yardage is about the same. So what we see, guy on the left, more of a touchdown score, 9 touchdowns last year versus 6 for the guy on the right. Yards per reception, 5 yards per reception difference between these two players. Yards per game is identical, which is surprising. Obviously there's a little bit of a rounding, so they're not actually identical, but they are close enough that when you round it, it rounds to the same thing. Yards after the catch going a little bit more to the guy on the left. Fantasy points per game, because it is PPR and the guy on the right did have 30 more receptions, you do see a slight bump for the guy on the right, but that is also reflected in their price tags. Option B, guy on the right, wide receiver 10, 27th overall, going at the beginning of the 3rd round. Guy on the left going in the 5th round, 52nd overall, still a top 20 wide receiver. I will spoil this slightly. There is a little bit of a gimmick. There is maybe possibly a correlation between these two players. I'll just tell you guys, these guys play on the same team. So I'll give you a few seconds. Comment down below who you think this is if you got it right. But let's reveal it. Guy on the left is Mike Williams, and so you know the guy on the right has to be Keenan Allen. These two are super fascinating because I could see a world where this flips, where Mike Williams becomes the alpha, Keenan Allen steps into more of a role from a target perspective that's just, wide receiver 2 as opposed to wide receiver 1. It could happen this year. I'm not sure that it will, but it could happen this year. And what we know is that if Mike Williams can command the type of targets that Keenan Allen is currently commanding, he can do more with them, okay? The touchdown rate, way higher, yards per reception, 5 more yards per reception. So if we give Mike Williams 30 more targets, I still think Keenan Allen is efficient. I still think that he's probably going to pay off in PPR leagues, especially leagues that reward you for receptions, because I still think he could get near 100 reception, even if his target share comes down a little bit. But Mike Williams could be ascending into an alpha role, and he's one of the few guys that, again, if you're trying to maximize the wide receiver points that your fantasy team is scoring, you need to be looking for guys like Mike Williams that could be coming in and command an opportunity that's well above where he's being priced at in the 5th round. I think he's a great pick. I'm not super sold on Keenan Allen in the 3rd. But I do think that that's an okay pick. Again, he's kind of still in that range where I still like a few running backs there, maybe even some tight ends. So I'm not totally on board with Keenan Allen. Mike Williams, definitely on board with him at his price tag. Either way, the Chargers offense, you have to be getting a piece of this Chargers offense. I don't care if it's Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, these two. Even if you want to take a flyer on a Gerald Everett or a Donald Parham super late in drafts as your tight end, it doesn't matter. You need to get somebody from this offense on your fantasy team. We know that teams that score lots of points are going to be the best teams to be drafting players from. So, again, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, both decent picks. I'm leaning towards the value with Mike Williams right now this season. Okay, these next two both played 17 games last season. We can see right away huge target advantage going to the guy on the right. 163 targets is just absolute insanity from a just target perspective. Very few wide receivers in the league getting this type of run in the receiving game, this many opportunities, but not crazy efficient with them, okay? Option B, only 93 receptions, 1,150 yards, respectable, but only 4 touchdowns. You would think with 163 targets that this guy would be an absolute alpha. Yards per reception is good, 12.4. Yards per game is decent. Yards after the catch is really good, 527. But the guy on the left, very efficient with the opportunity that he was given. Clearly not commanding the type of targets that the guy on the right did, but look at what he did with them. Very similar types of numbers, only 77 receptions, but 60 less targets, and he really only caught 16 less balls. So very efficient guy on the left, option A. Yardage was pretty solid, almost hit 1,000 yards with only 100 targets. That is unheard of for wide receivers. 5 touchdowns, so actually outpaced him in terms of touchdowns. And yards per reception was actually a little bit better. So not as dynamic. Yards after the catch, only 243. You'd hope that this efficiency was a little bit better. Just from a yards after the catch perspective, maybe he just doesn't really do a whole lot with the ball once he gets it, but he gets open, he makes catches, he moves the chains, and that's something that you want in a wide receiver. But look at the price tag difference with these two guys. Option A going outside of the top 100 picks in round 9. Option B being drafted probably for that target opportunity. Wide receiver 17 going in the 4th round, early 4th round. So maybe even sneaking in to the 3rd round in some leagues, depending on who you're playing with. So this to me is a very interesting comparison, and I'm going to get into it why. I'm going to give you a couple seconds. Make sure you comment down below who you think this is, but let's reveal it. On the left, we have Christian Kirk, and on the right, DJ Moore. Now, the reason I bring these two guys up and the reason I wanted this comparison to show this comparison is, one, I think both of these guys are getting an opportunity upgrade this season. DJ Moore getting a new quarterback, Christian Kirk getting a chance to be the wide receiver 1 on his team. I know that Christian Kirk is a little banged up as of this recording, but still very efficient last year as the wide receiver 2 or 3 option in his offense. Now he gets a chance to step up and be the wide receiver 1 for Jacksonville. Is there a world, if Christian McCaffrey stays healthy, that DJ Moore's target share comes down, Christian Kirk's target share goes up, and then you're looking at very inefficient versus very efficient wide receivers? And that's where I wanted this comparison to kind of lead to. What do we do with guys like Christian Kirk that are pretty efficient, that can be fantasy assets? And is it worth it to draft a guy like Christian Kirk and maybe give up on a guy like DJ Moore? 4th round price tag, pretty expensive for somebody that wasn't very efficient last year. Or are we buying the hype, the opportunity that DJ Moore could still stay at 140 targets and be more efficient with a quarterback upgrade in Baker Mayfield? I think I'm going to let you guys decide that. But for me personally, I think both of these guys are decent picks. Christian Kirk is somebody that I'm targeting a lot of drafts. As long as he is healthy when I'm drafting, I am going to get me some Christian Kirk on my teams, because I do feel like if he can get up into that 130 to 140 target range, I think he's going to be a very, very solid wide receiver 2 that could give you some boom weeks in an offense that is going to have to play catch up most of the year in Jacksonville. All right, so looking at these two numbers, pretty much identical across the board. 1 less game for the guy on the left, option A, but targets, receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns, yards per reception, yards per game, yards after the catch, fantasy points per game, almost all identical. There is a 1 round difference in price tag. Guy on the left going in the 5th round, guy on the right going in the 6th round, but both of these guys appear to be, useful fantasy assets. Lots of targets. These are most likely going to be wide receiver 1s or high-end wide receiver 2s. If you're guessing, you probably have an idea of who these guys are, but we're going to go through and just some things that I've noticed when looking at this, these two back, side by side. Obviously, 1 less game is not really going to make a huge difference. Guy on the right, almost identical in 17 games, but a little bit more yards per reception. So maybe being used slightly more downfield. Really just not a huge difference between these guys except for their price tag. One guy's going as the wide receiver 20 versus the wide receiver 14. So I'll give you guys a couple seconds and get your guesses in. Leave them down in the comments, but let's go. Let's reveal them up. Option A, Brandon Cooks. Option B, Michael Pittman Jr. Now, this comparison I just think is really interesting because neither one of these guys is really on an offense that is projected to be super explosive in the passing game, but I do think that both of these guys are slated right now to be the wide receiver 1 for their teams. If you've heard me talking about my personal draft strategies, one thing I really love is to target wide receivers that are going to be the wide receiver 1 on their team. I want the best guys before I get into the high-end wide receiver 2s on their own teams. I'm really trying to target these types of players, and these are two guys that I absolutely love this year. If you use the draft strategy that I usually use and you go running back early and often. So if you start your draft with, let's say, 2 or 3 running backs, or maybe you go running back, tight end, running back to start your draft, these are guys that I'm trying to target because I do expect them to lead their teams in targets, in receptions, in receiving yards, and probably touchdowns too. Michael Pittman is starting to climb up draft boards. I think people are starting to get a little bit more on him. I think that he is probably the best option for a guy that's currently going as a wide receiver 2 that could just absolutely explode this year. He got an upgrade at quarterback. Brandon Cooks going into year 2 with Davis Mills. You could argue that that is a quarterback upgrade as well because Davis Mills has gone through, some of the growing pains of being a year 1 starter as a rookie that wasn't really expected to be a starter. So Brandon Cooks, Michael Pittman Jr., 2 guys that I am targeting in the 4th, 5th, 6th rounds of my fantasy drafts this offseason. I think both of these guys have a chance to produce value for your fantasy teams at their current price tags. So that's it, guys. Wide receiver blind comparisons. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like and a comment down below to win a rookie injury guide every 250 likes. Giving away a rookie injury guide every 1,000 likes. We're giving away a fantasy headliners draft guide. Fantasy season is right around the corner. Looking forward to giving you guys more injury updates, more fantasy goodness as we get into the season. But that's all I got for you guys today. The doc is out. I'm a headliner.